Yugi! Come back! It should have been me, not him! It's not fair!
How did we get here? Well, if you're even remotely familiar with the Wake in the Dragons arc, you might be aware of the many bad decisions that led this guy to his lowest point in the entire Yu-Gi-Oh anime. But it's one thing to know what happened, and it's another thing entirely to understand how something like this could happen and why it should have been impossible. Because for the longest time, it was.
Let's duel! What have I done?
Before we jump in any further, I want to clarify that this video will be focusing solely on the 4Kids dub of the Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Monsters anime. Whilst there is definitely an argument to be made that the 4Kids dub is the weakest iteration of the Duel Monsters story,
check his pulse, Yugi.
No.
with many fans preferring the Japanese sub, Shonen Jump manga, and even the coveted Season 0, the dub is what I and so many others in the West grew up on in the mid-2000s, and it's that story that I'm most familiar with. That, and due to the high level of censorship and changes that 4Kids made when dubbing the English version, in its own way, the dub is arguably the most controversial version of the story, and in some other ways, which we'll dive into later, makes Yami's downfall feel even more impossible. So with that out of the way, let's take things back to the very beginning.
Exodia! Obliterate!
To understand why Yami's downfall in Waking the Dragons was for the longest time impossible, we first need to establish who our protagonist was prior to this arc. Almost the entirety of seasons 1 to 3, the show makes it clear that Yami is a borderline flawless, omnipotent protagonist. He vanquishes almost anyone who challenges him and is a just character that stands up for those in need of his help. Like when he dueled Panic to win back Mai's starships, and when he faced Duke Devlin to stop him humiliating Joey, and when he dueled Noah to... you get the idea. The Pharaoh holds his friends more dearly than anything else in the world, and it's those bonds of friendship and an unwavering faith in the heart of the cards that wins him the day almost every single time. And this can feel a little samey after a while. Don't get me wrong, it's fine for a story to have a hero who sets out to save the world or his family and friends. It's a story that's been told a million times before, and for good reason. People simply love a story with a conquering hero. And at its heart, the Yu-Gi-Oh! Dub is aimed at young boys not yet desensitized to the hero inevitably vanquishing the villain. And that's completely fine. But the difference between Yami and someone like Luke Skywalker is that throughout the entire original Star Wars trilogy, Luke is the undeniable underdog almost the entire time as he tries to bring down the might of a ruthless, all-conquering empire. Outside of his duels with Pegasus and Marik, Yami never really feels like the underdog going into any of his other duels. Even as a kid, I always had full confidence that Yami was going to win almost all the time. With that being said, I do need to give credit where it's due and acknowledge that most of the time, the show does an excellent job of making Yugi's opponents still seem credible in their own way. As a young boy, every single duel still had me on the edge of my seat, and that's not something to be sniffed at. After a while though, a pattern begins to emerge. Typically, Yugi will start a duel off well, taking an early lead, lulling his friends and possibly even the young viewer into a false sense of security. Then, slowly but surely, the opponent cheats their way back into the match, or their long-term strategy finally starts paying off. Before we know it, Yugi is down to the crumbs of his life points and is only a turn or two from defeat. Then of course, thanks to the heart of the cards, Yami inevitably draws the card he needs and wins. Lol. In isolation, a duel playing out like this isn't a problem. In fact, it's a fantastic way of creating a tension-filled, competitive narrative around any kind of fictional match or game. Some of the most enthralling real-life sporting moments play out exactly like this. But when the majority of duels follow this formula, it can get old fast, which leads us to quite possibly the biggest problem throughout the entire show. Yami doesn't lose. Ever. At least not cleanly anyway, and that's a very important distinction. Characters grow when they lose. They're forced to look at themselves and ask, is everything okay? Can I even achieve what I've set out to achieve? They have to reset and go again. learn from their mistakes and know that even if they give it their everything, it still might not be enough. And from the viewer's perspective, watching the main character take an L can make a show go from fairly predictable to a damn near mystery in one foul swoop. The protagonist has already lost once, therefore it's not unreasonable to think that they could lose again, especially if the story's climax still seems far off in the distance. As a result, that final victory feels far more powerful than if everything had been smooth sailing. Luke Skywalker overthrowing the Empire, the Avengers stopping Thanos, and Cody Rhodes defeating Roman Reigns at WrestleMania all felt huge because we, the audience, had seen our heroes fall before. A protagonist's defeat lingers long in the memory of the viewer until those demons are finally exercised against all odds. And unfortunately, we never really get this with Yami. In the first 3 seasons, Yugi does technically suffer 3 defeats by my count. However, none of those losses came about for a lack of technical skill, inexperience, or even a personality flaw on his part, but more through technicalities and the nefarious tactics of his opponents, which severely waters down the impact of those defeats.
So, isn't that right, Teddy?
Hail Satan!
The first defeat I want to look at is probably the least important of the 3, especially as it's technically little Yugi that loses this match, not Yami. However, the show makes it abundantly clear how it wants the audience to feel about its protagonist following this defeat, which ironically makes Yami's inevitable fall in Waking the Dragons even more unlikely. After Grandpa is accused of stealing the Blue Eyes White Dragon card, Yugi agrees to duel Rebecca Hawkins to defend his grandfather's honour. Throughout the entire duel, it's made quite clear just how conceited and misguided Rebecca's approach to dueling is. She sacrifices her monsters without a second thought and treats Yugi with little to no respect. After a lot of consideration and soul searching, little Yugi concedes the match in effort to teach Rebecca the values of being a true duelist and that sometimes there are more important things in life than winning a card game. Had that been that, Rebecca learned her lesson and the credits hit, it would have been a nice little character arc to round off a small subplot with a nice moral story. However, at the end of the episode, Rebecca's grandfather is wheeled out to tell everyone that Yugi is actually the winner because he drew a game-winning card, but that he simply refused to play it. This little bit of dialogue completely undercuts the idea that sometimes winning is not always the most important thing, as the show itself still desperately needs its audience to know that Yugi is still technically the best. He only conceded the duel because he is a gentleman, which I think most viewers, even young kids, would have probably picked up on anyway. I think it would have been a much more powerful message if the audience never got to know for sure what card Yugi had drawn. As a result, any immediate character growth and potential that could be taken from this loss is largely flitted away.
You do realize bad boys will be punished.
From the off, Pegasus uses his Millennium Eye to cheat, forcing Yugi on the ropes for most of the match. Despite this, Yami is still able to turn things around and orders what would be a match-winning attack, only for the time limit to expire before the damage could be dealt. Pegasus even acknowledges this himself, as the show once again makes it abundantly clear that Yugi only lost on a technicality. Just imagine how much more devastating this loss would have been had Pegasus completely crushed Yugi, even if by cheating. But because Yami had already been mere seconds from victory, it makes his chances going into their next duel that much better, even if he is still the underdog. We, the viewer, know that Yami doesn't need to improve at dueling or overcome any personal flaws because we've already seen the proof that Yugi can defeat Pegasus, despite his cheating. As with the first duel, there's a lot of wasted potential here. This defeat still moves the plot along, sure, as Pegasus steals Grandpa's soul. This forces Yugi to compete in the Duelist Kingdom tournament to save him, but for Yami's character growth, a loss like this does almost nothing. Little Yugi feels sad for a little bit in the next episode, but that's about the extent of the aftermath from an emotional perspective.
You're a third-rate duelist with a fourth-rate deck.
The final defeat I want to discuss is undoubtedly the most impactful from a character growth perspective. In fact, this duel and Yugi's subsequent loss is damn near perfect storytelling, and certainly some of the best of the entire show. If I were to rank my favourite duels of all time, this match easily goes in my top 5 without hesitating, possibly even higher. This duel is back and forth from the off, with both duelists forcing the absolute best out of one another. Then, With his plan slowly coming to fruition, Kaiba crushes Yugi's hopes of saving his grandfather with a decimating virus trap. In a single move, all of Yami's strongest monsters are rendered useless. To make matters worse, Kaiba then summons the all-powerful Blue Eyes Ultimate Dragon, and Yami finds himself staring defeat in the face once again, only this time he has no Exodia to bail him out. Until, through the heart of the cards and some absolute Season 1 bullshit, Yugi is able to negate Kaiba's ultimate attack with his very own ultimate defense. Soon after, Yugi utilizes more Season 1 nonsense, this time by targeting the Blue Eyes, weakening it with every round, turning the duel completely upside down. Next turn, Yugi's Celtic Guardian will swing his sword and take off the final head of the Great Beast, his comeback all but complete. Defeated, Seto Kaiba stares over at his great rival, broken. Like Yugi, he too is fighting to save a family member, and defeat is simply not an option. With nothing else to play, Kaiba decides to risk everything on one final gamble. He climbs atop the castle wall and spells it out plainly for our protagonist. Attack me and I die. Well, okay. Technically in the dub, through the biggest use of inverted commas Western animation has ever seen, Kaiba says that if Yugi attacks him, he could fall and possibly hurt himself. That glorious 4-kid censorship strikes again. This is easily one of the most notorious differences between the subbed and dubbed versions, but even as a kid, I understood clearly enough what Kaiba was actually implying, even if 4Kids didn't want me to, which still makes this a very powerful scene in its own right, despite it being done miles better in the sub. Not to be manipulated by his great foe and still only one attack from victory, Yami commands the Celtic Guardian to end the duel without hesitating, and little Yugi, emotionally distraught, on his knees and through tear-filled eyes, yells out for his monster to stop. Kaiba, who shows no such mercy, revives the Blue Eyes head and ends the duel immediately, leaving the entire gang in complete dismay. This duel was special. Not only was it hugely competitive, but it easily had the highest stakes of any duel in the series until this point. Yami knew that, and he wanted more than anything to win. Little Yugi knew it too, but no matter how much he wanted to save his grandpa, he didn't have it in him to hurt someone else. Truly, little Yugi is too good for this world. If it were me, I'd have given Kaiba the Bandit Keith treatment. The duel against Kaiba was the first time the Pharaoh showed any kind of morally grey or dark undertones, and we really don't see that again until in the Wake in the Dragons arc. In a way, Yugi's match with Kaiba in Duelist Kingdom almost subtly foreshadows Yami's fall, but only in that very specific sense. After all, this is the first and only time in the series that Yami and Yugi are not on the same page, and it simply does not happen again until the eventual downfall. With that being said, the only possible negative I can think of for this defeat is that once again, Yugi didn't lose cleanly. Kaiba had to threaten to kill himself to get the win, so the viewer is still completely aware that technically there is still no better duelist in the land than Yami. But the emotional dilemma of winning to save a loved one by hurting someone else was played out so well, the fact that Yami didn't lose cleanly doesn't really matter here, and for creating a scenario where that's the case, the story deserves so much credit.
I surrender. My breasts can't withstand another friendship speech.
Now Yugi is awakened to the very real truth that he carries the spirit of an ancient Egyptian pharaoh inside him, but also that Yami can't necessarily be trusted. And to the show's credit, they don't just gloss over this immediately. Yugi initially swears that he will never duel again out of fear of what Yami might do to win. As a kid, that really hit me. Obviously this notion could never last, and thanks to a surprisingly heartwarming duel from Taya and Mai, in which they both try to convince Yugi to duel again in their own different ways, he eventually agrees. But everything is still not quite right, which is how it should be. Given how devastating his duel with Kaiba was, it would be wrong for everything to be hunky-dory again straight away. In his next duel, Yami spends the majority of the match against Mai on the back foot. He is still reluctant to let Yami back in and help him. Eventually, Yami does win his trust back, and together they pull off the win. But these are levels of character development that we'd never seen with our protagonists before, and we don't really get this again until in Season 4. That's ultimately a huge reason why Yami's fall is so shocking, so impossible. Yami simply does not lose, and on the odd occasion that he does, it either doesn't affect him, or the show flat out presents his defeat as an inaccurate representation of his dueling abilities. The viewer can never once doubt that Yami is the best duelist in the entire show, until Season 4.
Since he's useless, I'll sacrifice my dark magician.
The beginning of Waking the Dragons is not really anything we haven't seen before. Just when you think Yugi and the gang are finally on the cusp of discovering the truth surrounding the pharaoh's past, the Egyptian gods are stolen from Yugi and end up in the hands of new foes, looking to use the god card's power for their own gain. The main antagonist, Dart, and his henchmen use the Seal of Orichalcos as their primary weapon. When played, this card steals the soul of the losing duelist, making every single duel as close to life and death as 4 kids would allow. In order to fight this new evil, Yami is bestowed a legendary dragon card, the Eye of Timaeus. Roughly midway through the arc, Yami finds himself in a match against someone that at first glance could quite easily be considered nothing more than a mere villain of the week. Besides stealing the god cards, all Yami's opponent had done until this point was mock the gang from a distance and blow up Arthur Hawkins' lab, without ever attempting to personally engage anyone in a duel. By all accounts, this match should have been nothing new for our protagonist. Yami had spent pretty much all of the previous seasons defeating whatever duelist Pegasus, Marek and Noah had put in front of him. This time, Yugi had caught up to one of Dart's main guys, and beating him would surely be just another step on the path to confronting this season's final boss. But Raphael is different, and the show makes this clear before the duel even begins. As he awaits the pharaoh's coming, an eagle appears beside him, and that baffled me as a child. Most of the time, the show can't make it any more obvious just how abhorrent Yugi's opponent is. Weevil underwood threw Exodia into the sea. Panic preys on weakness and fear. Hell, even Seto Kaiba would stop at absolutely nothing to crush whoever stood before him. Raphael is nothing like this. Unlike most henchmen, he doesn't duel for pleasure or personal gain. He wholeheartedly believes in Dart's plan and is convinced that it will make the world a better place. All who are pure will gain salvation, and those who are wicked and evil will be punished. Raphael is not selfish, nor is he evil. Raphael is dueling to save the world, just like Yami. And this throws Yami off completely. He's used to facing guys who are blinded by their own greed, opponents that revel in selfishness, rivals who harbour only ill intent. These are all traits that eventually lead to a duelist's inevitable downfall in the Yu-Gi-Oh universe. But Raphael displays none of these traits. He constantly tells Yami that he is evil and that by defeating him, he will save the world. And these words slap Yami in the face. After all, Yami himself usually takes the moral high ground, often multiple times throughout a single duel. To be accused of being evil himself, that an opponent such as Raphael would see himself as just, Yami just can't deal with it. To make matters worse, there's another crucial difference with this duel too, one that at first glance might not seem like the biggest deal, but actually has huge consequences. Yugi fights this duel alone. Now, it's certainly not the first time this has happened in the series, but whenever Yami has competed in a duel without his friends before, it's always been because he and the gang were forced apart against their will. Otherwise, Joey, Taya and Tristan were always there cheering on their friend, every single time. Quite often it's their support that enables Yugi to keep pushing on even if everything might look hopeless. This time, Yami willingly left his friends behind to take part in this duel alone, and that changes everything. Had Yugi's friends, particularly Joey, been there, Yami's fall probably never would have happened. Like good friends, they encourage the pharaoh with every opportunity they get, of course, but if the gang ever thought Yami was going to do something shady, they'd let him know how it really was. In this duel, Yami badly misses the authenticity and strength of his friends. Outside of the general vibes and lonely setting, this duel plays out like no other match in the entire show. Raphael dominates Yami. As I mentioned earlier, the show loves dangling Yami only inches from defeat before he inevitably turns things around, but this time it's completely different. For the first 2 episodes of this duel, Yami cannot build up any momentum whatsoever. No matter what he tries, Raphael cancels it out almost instantly, all while slowly but surely chipping away at Yami's life points. It's all done fairly too. Raphael does not cheat, nor does he rely on the power of a millennium item. Raphael, beyond being an obviously talented duelist, has one single power. It's a power that until now, no one but Yugi could tap into as strongly as this. Like Yugi, Raphael has an unwavering trust and love for his entire deck. A trust and love in the heart of the cards that even Yami cannot match, because for the longest time, Raphael's guardian cards were the only family he had, and Raphael will stop at nothing to keep his family alive. And Yami suffers badly because of this. For the first time, he faces off against someone who shares similar qualities and beliefs when it comes to dueling. The two only differ in their worldviews. As a result, Yami cannot get near Raphael. He cannot destroy even a single monster of his despite bringing out what should be his new match-winning card, the Eye of Timaeus. Before long, Raphael imprisons the legendary dragon in crystal, and Yami finds himself completely helpless. With every turn, defeat steps closer and closer, and here Yami stands friendless, his faith in the heart of the cards possibly even wavering for the first time too. But that's not all. Midway through the duel, Raphael plays the card that all but seals Yami's fate. Up until this point in the arc, the power of the seal of Orichalcos had been undeniable. The entire gang rightly fear its soul-snatching power more than anything else, and every single antagonist has played it in every single duel so far. But this time, it's not the seal of Orichalcos that Raphael plays. Instead, it's the magic card Exchange. Normally, this card would allow both players to pick a card from their opponent's hand and take it for themselves. In this case, both Yami and Raphael only hold one card each, so it's a simple swap instead. Yami is so rattled he doesn't even initially look at his new card. Only after the swap is completed does our hero realise the power he now holds, and that revelation obliviates him harder than Exodia ever could. The seal of Orichalcos now resides with Yami. At first he can't understand it. Not only does the seal take the loser's soul, but it also gives the player's monsters a 500 point boost. Why would Raphael do this? Why would he surrender his most powerful weapon? Before Yami can come up with any sort of answer, Little Yugi makes his stance quite clear. They cannot play that card no matter what. At first, Yami is hesitant, but after Little Yugi insists, he agrees. That card is evil and cannot be played. As the duel goes on, Raphael reveals his true intentions. The seal shows who a person truly is, and by giving Yami the seal, the Pharaoh will reveal himself to be truly evil, just as Raphael suspected all along. He does not need to play the seal himself to take Yami down. Instead, Raphael is content to let the Pharaoh become the master of his own downfall. Try as he might to deny it, the pull of the Orichalcos becomes harder and harder to resist. Desperate and set to lose the duel automatically at the end of his turn, Yami knows that the only way he can win is by activating the very card he never wanted. Still, Little Yugi insists, that card is evil. Please, Pharaoh, don't play it. Yami refuses to listen. He shoves Little Yugi away, spurning his closest and most trusted friend. Yami, against all odds, activates the seal of Orichalcos.
And here we go.
Everything changes. Infused with the power of the Orichalcos, in almost typical Yami fashion, he turns the duel completely on its head and frees his legendary dragon from its crystal prison. However, something is seriously wrong here. Timaeus abandons Yami immediately after being freed. Under no circumstances can he abide the seal. Yami, however, only falls deeper within its grip, becoming more and more influenced by its darkness, sacrificing almost every monster he has. Now, sacrificing monsters is an essential mechanic of the game, but Yami now does it without paying them a second thought or without any due respect to the tributed monster. This was a big theme in Little Yugi's duel with Rebecca, but now we've done a complete 180, and thanks to the seal of Orichalcos, Yami has disregarded everything he once stood for. Worse still, he is even talking about power. From episode 1, Yami was always first to disregard the idea that duel monsters revolved around power, and frequently lectured Kaiba on believing so. Now, under the influence of the Orichalcos, Yami's entire dueling ethos has changed. Cards that were once so precious to him are now being cast aside as if they were nothing. He even calls the Dark Magician, his favourite card, useless. In any other scenario, that is simply unthinkable. This whole scene is like nothing that the dub has ever shown before. The Yami we knew is well and truly gone now, and every other character knows it too. Little Yugi is distraught, temporarily banished from his own body. He can only watch on, completely devastated at his friend's betrayal. Duke, Tristan and Joey arrive on the scene soon after, and they are shocked to discover that Yami has activated the seal of Orichalcos. Joey in particular cannot get over it and notices immediately that Yami is not right as he makes speech after speech on power and how he's going to win the match. But it doesn't matter. The seal of Orichalcos is so strong, victory seems all but certain for Yami. Since activating his all-powerful card, he has reduced Raphael's life points to a measly 100. On his next turn, Yami only needs to sacrifice one monster and he will automatically win the duel. For Raphael, only one card can save him. He draws, at no point ever losing faith in his monster, and his faith is rewarded. Raphael draws a card that bears the eagle wings, Guardian Eotos, and summons it to the field. Using the might of all of Yami's carelessly discarded monsters, he raises Eotos' attack points to 10,000 and strikes for game. Yami can only yell out in despair as his entire world comes crumbling down. For the first time in the entire English dub, has lost the duel as clean as a whistle. After the attack concludes, he can't say anything. Hell, Yami cannot even move. He just stands there in shock, ready for the very card he played to absorb his soul. But little Yugi does not give up. Using the Millennium Puzzle, he breaks the seal and forces his way back into his own body. It only needs one of us, so I'm letting the seal take me instead. I've said it before, I'll say it again. Little Yugi Moto is too good for this world. The Pharaoh tries to protest, but Yugi makes sure it's his soul that's taken instead. Victorious, Raphael flies off in a helicopter, dumping what he believes to be the Pharaoh's lifeless body with his friends, who are all shell-shocked. The first time ever, Yugi is truly lost. And now we find ourselves back at the beginning of the video. For the longest time, his defeat against Raphael was impossible. Yami was too just a character, too good a duelist. No matter what happens, the priority of the show always seemed to be to ensure that there could be no debate as to who was the best duelist in the Yu-Gi-Oh universe, nor who was the true hero of the show. Waking the Dragons looked that ideology square in the eye and said, no, we're going to throw something different at you this time. And the end result was simply incredible. The most interesting aspect for me is that Yami's first true loss was entirely his own fault. It makes it all the more satisfying from a storytelling perspective. Once again, I cannot stress enough that for the majority of the first 3 seasons, Yami was always the hero fighting for justice. Having him lose against a duelist that was simply better than him or a flat-out cheater would have been one thing. It still would have been very cool to see, and it certainly would have tested Yami in ways that the previous seasons never had, but Yami being the architect of his own downfall just adds an extra level of complexion about his character, a layer that never existed in him before. Going into the Waking the Dragons arc, the idea that something like this could ever happen would have been insane. No first-time viewer of any age would have ever believed that Yami could A. lose to Raphael, and B. that Yami would be the cause of his own demise, costing little Yugi his soul. Even saying it out loud now, knowing full well what happened, it still feels impossible, blasphemous even. The first 3 seasons ironically end up subverting the viewer's expectations so much that Yami's defeat in season 4 is the shock defeat to end all shock defeats. It was a needless defeat too, which just adds another layer on top of an already triple stacked cake. Don't get me wrong, in the world of Yu-Gi-Oh, everyone settles their differences in a duel. That's just how this universe works. If you can't accept that going in, Yu-Gi-Oh probably isn't the show for you. But Yami's duel against Raphael wasn't a tournament match. Nobody's soul or the fate of the world would have been on the line if the Seal of Orichalcos had never been played. Yes, of course Yami wanted to win, but had he lost without playing the Seal of Orichalcos, nothing would have happened. It would have been unbelievably devastating to lose, for sure, but ultimately, Raphael would have failed in his mission to capture the soul of the Pharaoh. Yami, Yugi and the gang could have regrouped and tried to find another way of locating darts and bring him down. If Yami had ignored the call of the seal, Raphael might have even been convinced to join the gang, despite beating the Pharaoh in a duel. But through Yami's selfishness and desperation to win, he lost the one thing that was most precious to him. He fell when before he had flown effortlessly. Like Icarus, he got too close to the sun, or in this case, the Seal of Orichalcos, and paid the ultimate price. But if you think that was the end, and that the Pharaoh couldn't possibly sink any lower, then boy, have I got news for you.
See, madness, as you know, is like gravity. All it takes is a little push.
Yami's fall may have been impossible, but difficult as it may be to believe, it's not over yet. Her defeat against Raphael was merely the beginning, and Yami's long-anticipated rematch against Weevil Underwood forces him further down into depths of rage and despair. Like his match against Raphael, Yami vs Weevil 2 is another awesome duel, but for a completely different reason this time. Rocked by the loss of Yugi, the gang head off to try and find Darts' location and rescue their friend. They jump on a train, but shortly into their journey something seems very wrong. All the other passengers have disappeared, and as the gang try to find out what's going on, Joey and Tristan are separated from Yami and Taya. Yami and Taya head for the driver's coach and are forced onto the roof of the train where Weevil awaits them. After failing to talk down the vengeance-fueled insect, Weevil plays the Seal of Orichalcos, forcing Yami into a duel. The setup for this duel couldn't be more tantalising. Yami vs Weevil was one of the first duels in the entire series, and the two haven't faced off against one another since. Whilst Yami has fought against plenty of selfish little wretches since then, those duels never quite had such a personal edge to them like this one. By beating Weevil and Rex in Duelist Kingdom, Yugi and Joey inadvertently ruined their lives. And whilst it's undeniable that Weevil and Rex only have themselves to blame for their losses and how things subsequently turned out, their resentment towards Yugi and Joey is still somewhat understandable. Until Yugi and Joey came along, only Seto Kaiba had a better reputation within the game, and after their Duelist Kingdom defeats, their stock decreased dramatically. Yami simply isn't ready for this fight. He can't stand Weevil, but he has bigger things on his mind than dueling someone on a petty revenge mission. Cannot forgive himself for what he did to little Yugi, and for the first time ever, he has a reason to truly doubt his ability as a duelist, which Weevil takes full advantage of. Like the match against Raphael, Weevil dominates Yami as his insecurities get the better of him. His strategy of turning all of Yami's monsters into an insect proves very effective, rendering it impossible for him to attack, whilst the magic card Insect Barrier is in play. Worse still, just when hope seemed around the corner, Timaeus abandons Yami once again, as the darkness revealed by the Orichalcos still resides within him, leaving Yami on the edge of defeat. With every move, Weevil's grip on the duel only tightens, until eventually the Pharaoh is set to lose automatically at the end of his turn, and then Weevil makes the biggest mistake of his life. Since his introduction in Season 1, Weevil has always been an unlikable little cockroach, employing the dirtiest tactics and mocking his opponents at every opportunity. This duel was no different. Weevil's taunting had been relentless and slowly but surely had worn the Pharaoh down. Then, finally, he went one step too far and decides to play quite possibly the cruelest trick and also the most savage burn of the entire show. He pulls out a random bug card from his pocket and tells the Pharaoh that it's the key to free Yugi's soul. Yami, who can't see that it's only a wimpy bug card, demands it from Weevil and moves forward to take it for himself. Then Weevil tears it in half, plunging Yami into darkness once more. Weevil laughs and confesses the truth. "You'll pay for that. Hear me, Weevil?" says Yami, staring daggers into his eyes. Never were truer words spoken. Using Magical Breaker's special ability, Yami destroys Weevil's Insect Barrier. He then uses his Poison Butterfly to destroy Weevil's monster and follows up by having Magical Breaker attack Weevil directly. But it's not enough. At the beginning of the turn, Weevil had close to all his life points still intact, and even after Yami's monsters had both attacked, he still had more than half remaining. Weevil celebrates. Victory is his, but Yami's not done. Instead of conceding his turn and the duel with it, he activates Berserker Soul. This spell card allows Yugi to keep drawing until he draws a magical trap card. With every monster Yami draws, Magical Breaker can attack again. Yami draws, and it's a monster. Magical Breaker attacks again. Weevil screeches in pain, but still, it's not enough to win the duel. So Yami draws again. Another monster. This time, Weevil's life points hit 0. It's over, the Pharaoh has won, but Yami isn't done. He draws again. Another monster. Another attack. Yami draws again. It just isn't Weevil's day. He attacks him again. Another monster, another attack. Weevil screams and screams, but Yami keeps going, the rage coursing throughout. Only by Taya pleading and grabbing hold of Yami can she snap him back to reality and finally stop him from attacking his foe. I bloody love this duel. It really delves into Yami's struggles and builds upon his defeat to Raphael. Timaeus once again abandons Yami, and he cannot properly get to grips with this duel until the end. After being emotionally wrecked and continuously taunted by Weevil, Yami snaps and does something we've never seen in the 4Kids dub before. Fueled by anger and hate, understandably in this case in my opinion, Yami loses complete control and breaks. He attacks Weevil over and over beyond the point of overkill. And I just love it. Not only because Weevil is a little slime ball, but in that moment Yami is relatable. He's a mere mortal like the rest of us. No longer is the Pharaoh this morally just, incorruptible, card-wielding Superman. Just like you and I, Yami can fall, and he fell harder than anyone could have ever believed. Again, similarly to his defeat against Raphael, the idea that a first-time viewer could predict anything like this happening going into Season 4 is insane. No one would, not a single soul. But these duels and Yami's subsequent fall somehow managed to feel completely organic, when for the longest time, these matches were impossible. That is why Yami's fall is so special and what drove me to make this video. This never should have happened.
Well, only if destroying an innocent soul concerns you.
Nah. As the president of a major corporation, I have to do that every day.
Following on from Yami's duel with Weevil, little Yugi eventually confronts the Pharaoh in an epiphany duel of sorts and helps banish the darkness from within. After that, Yami faces off against Raphael in a pretty epic rematch in which Raphael is convinced to join Yami and the gang. Yami and Kaiba eventually end up facing off against Darts and his almighty Great Leviathan, defeating them in the end. Whilst Yami's fall and morally grey character arc could never continue for the rest of the show's run, it was fantastic to see, even if only for a brief period. The Waking the Dragons arc has a bit of an odd place in Yu-Gi-Oh history. Technically, it is a filler arc, and I would say its biggest weakness is that it doesn't really affect the rest of the story once this arc concludes. Everything is forgiven between Yami and little Yugi, and the world goes back to normal. The gang kind of just carry on from exactly where they were prior to Season 4. So yes, unfortunately, in that sense, this season is filler. But we do get so much from Season 4 that we simply never get throughout the rest of the dub. As far as character work is concerned, Waking the Dragons tops every other arc in the 4Kids dub, and it's not even close for me. Yami as a character is explored in ways we'd never seen before or since. He finally loses a duel cleanly and has something bigger to overcome besides an evil villain. I also think Raphael and Valon are great characters. On the surface, both could quite easily be considered throwaway villains, but we've already delved into what makes Raphael special, and Valon is just as layered. Yes, he's the henchman of a main villain, but he also cares deeply for My Valentine. And in his duel with Joey, the longer it goes on, the more respect grows between the two duelists, and that's not something that happens very often in the Yu-Gi-Oh universe. Most of the time, our heroes are facing off against someone despicable, so Joey versus Valon is a welcome change of pace. When Valon does eventually lose to Joey, he tips his hat to him and knows that Joey would do whatever it takes to keep Mai safe, which is just a nice bit of depth not often given to an antagonist in the dub. In terms of character growth and depth, I don't think Waking the Dragons can be beat, but in a lot of other aspects, the other arcs of the dub take the crown. In terms of story, Season 4 is one of the weaker seasons. The concept of the Seal of Orichalcos is very cool and is executed very well, but by this point, Yami and the gang heading off to save the world is something we've already seen before, and is seriously hurt by the fact that it doesn't impact the show in the long run. Finally, probably the weakest point of the entire arc is the main villain himself. Darts lacks the charm and charisma of Pegasus, the malice and rage of Marek, and even the entitled nature of Noah, who was helped by the fact he had a personal connection to Kaiba. In comparison to the other villains of the show, even Yami Bakura, I do think Darts comes up a little short, which is a shame because there's so much good stuff from a whole bunch of characters in this arc that I've not even delved into. That's not to say Darts is necessarily a bad villain, he just doesn't compare well to the others in my opinion. Overall, Season 4 is an inconsistent arc, but one that I'll always treasure. It gave us a new side to Yami, something completely different from anything prior. For the first time, our hero truly fell, and for that, Season 4 will always be special. That being said, thank you so much for watching. This has been Yami, the Impossible Fall. Take care, and I'll see you on the next one.